Franchise Secrets, Eric Von Horn.
If you're not a part of the Franchise Secrets Facebook group, what are you waiting for? It's franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. I cannot believe how valuable this group turned out to be. When someone asks a question, the feedback is honest, authentic, very helpful, and it's from multiple perspectives. If you're not sure that you're getting the most accurate information about franchising, then check out the largest, most helpful Facebook group in all of franchising. Whether you're a Z, a Zor, a buyer, or investor, join our free Facebook group at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. Hey, welcome to the Franchise Secrets Podcast with your host, Eric Van Horn, here today with JT Thiessen. Now, this guy is well known in the franchising world. He's like me. He delayed law school. Actually, he quit law school like I did, and he went to work for this little brand called Remax Realty. And that was a little brand back then. This was before Remax was really Remax. And he started selling franchises for them, crushed it, continued in his franchise journey to budget blinds in 2003. And now everybody in the franchising world, at least everybody that I know, knows JT from budget blinds. JT, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
So, man, I know I covered that real quick. So fill in some of the gaps for us.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny. I was never ever planning on getting into the franchise world, and I was doing a class my senior year with a finance professor at school, and we got into this franchising thing, and they said, you sign away, pick a company, and then send off for their what was called a UFOC at the time, which is now an FDD, right? And they'll send it to you. And I was just amazed. I picked TGIF Fridays, and I was amazed that they would send some 20-year-old kid without $20 in his bank account this whole document that told me all the secrets of their business. And I don't know, it was so crazy, but I just fell in love with the idea of what they did. I was just amazed and so interested in it. And so I wrote a pretty good paper. My professor introduced me to Remax at the time that were looking to fill some area development positions within their organization. And so I said, oh, why not? I'll give this a try first before going on to what I thought I was going to do. And just absolutely fell in love with the whole thing. And so here it is 30 years later. And now with Home Franchise Concepts and the 9 brands we have here.
Well, you're so many people know and respect you as on a podcast, on somebody else's podcast before you, and they dropped your name like 3 times. So your name's getting dropped out there. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to drop JT's name too. He's coming on my podcast. So we were talking a while ago, and you made this comment like, hey, the franchisee that is number 10 is different than the franchisee that's 210. There's a different mindset. It's a different buyer. So there's so many things between the 10 and the 210. So why don't we spend some time diving into that? Because I get a lot of emerging brands on here, but having someone like you that's used to that's working with very established, proven brands with a lot of money behind them, it is a different experience for a franchisee.
Yeah, I remember that comment, and we actually have a couple emerging brands or emerging brands that we've started here as well. Budget Blinds now with almost 1,500 franchisees is obviously very large in what we do. But I was here, I started when we had 80, so it wasn't quite emerging at that point, but still, very entrepreneurial. We were bootstrapped and did everything a different way. And I think back even to those days and some of the early franchisees that we brought in, and that here we are almost 25 years later, and they're still, validating the business. And they were the ones that helped us grow it phenomenally for that period between 2003 and 2007. But since then, we've acquired some other brands like Concrete Craft that had 5 franchisees. Now we've got a kitchen tune-up franchise, which is well established, but we also now have started bath tune-up, and we started with 2 franchisees there. And so we're growing now. So I've got a little bit of experience in what it looks like to join a already well-established mature brand versus what it looks like when you're adding franchisee 2, 5, 10, 15, 20. And I think what I talk to people about is, listen, if you're really wanting to come into a nice warm bath where everything's perfect and the candles are lit and it's really, really comfortable, then you should look at one of our more mature brands. It's all figured out. It's all done. You've got tons of resources. It's been working forever. You don't have to think about a thing you just got to plug in, do it, follow the system. You know how that works, right? But if you're looking at joining a newer brand, if you're going to be franchisee 5 or 10 or whatever, you probably need to understand that there's going to be some work that needs to be done on both sides. And we're looking to you to partner with us in this, meaning we understand full off that if you're looking at a concrete craft back when we bought it and there was 5 franchisees, there was a lot of work that needed to be done, a lot of changes. There was a lot of testing that needed to be done. The validation is going to come hot and heavy and often, and there's only 5 of you. So you're going to be put on the spot to do a lot of talking. And you need to be able to put a positive spin on it as best you can when you're talking about the business to help us grow it. You can't be the person that's like, oh, I thought they'd have everything done and this doesn't work and that doesn't work. Well, no, we went into this admitting that we're still figuring some of these pieces out. We want you to be a part of that solution. And if that's not something you're comfortable with, then it's not a bad thing. It just means you're a different buyer. You should be looking at something that's more established where you can just go in and be a part of it as opposed to creating it in a lot of ways, which is what we see from a lot of the emerging brands we work with.
How different does, let's say, Concrete Craft look with 10 franchisees versus where it is today? Like, because in my mind, it's going to look very different because there's a lot of learning that happens. But what have you seen? Like, how different does the system, the process, the sales, the services look at when you acquired it to where it is today?
Yeah, and the 2 guys that founded that company are still running that organization for us. And listen, it was great when we bought them. It's kind of an interesting story. These guys are like concrete geniuses. Like they live, breathe, eat, sleep concrete. I remember when we were putting the website together and I was like, hey, do you guys have any pictures you can send for the website? And I thought they were going to send me like cool before and after type pictures. They sent me this picture of this mountain of rocks in Mississippi. And they're like, isn't this cool? This is where we get the chemical that goes into this and that. And I'm like, listen, no one thinks that's cool except you 2. And I'm glad that you do, because I need geeks like you guys that are into the product and get it. But what they weren't good at was marketing, training, support, organization, accounting, finance, all the other things that you need a franchisor to be really good at if you're going to be proficient and grow the business and support the franchisees. It wasn't their fault. They were trying to wear about 11 hats, didn't have the money to spend on going out and hiring a lot of people. And so those that were with them at the time were kind of just bumping along with them. And it was more of a sort of a business opportunity than was really a franchise in a lot of ways. So what we did is came in and said, listen, we're going to pause everything. We're going to rework the model. We're going to hire some people. We're going to leverage some of the other services that we have here at the home office. And we want you guys to just focus on the product, and we're going to put other people in charge of marketing and everything else. And then we're going to go about the franchise development side of it in a way that really finds the people that are going to help us take this business to the next level. And the hardest part about franchising in my role as franchise development in a emerging brand is saying no. But you have to be able to say no if the wrong person for number 10 is coming along. And I've told people, like, listen, you might be great for 100, call me back, or I'll call you, but you're not this. I can already tell you're going to need too much support. You're going to need too much help. It's not going to be, you're not entrepreneurial enough. I think that's the thing we talk about, right? Like, I think when we talk about franchising, we want people with an entrepreneurial spirit. But entrepreneurs like yourself know that a lot of times you guys come in and try to break everything up and refix it. And they're like, that's the mindset. Whereas we want someone with that spirit. Like, I want to do it for myself. I want to be my own boss. I want to be in control of my schedule and my future, but I don't want to figure everything out. And those early franchisors need to be a little bit more entrepreneurial. Whereas the ones that come afterwards, we just really want them to have that spirit. We're not looking for them to break everything all the time. So yeah, today, all the systems are in place. We put some fantastic franchisees in place early on that were more than willing to get on calls with everyone's, get into troubleshooting groups, like really be part of, hey, we want to put this thing on our backs and help carry the entire system forward. And it's, now we're at 100 franchisees a few years later, and that doesn't happen without the right people coming in at the inset.
what can you give us the overall structure of HFC? Like, what does that structure look like? Because there's a lot of people that are emerging brands out there, and then people are there's big established brands out there. There's private equity companies that that own different ones, and so give us like the big picture of the structure and why it's structured the way that it is.
Sure. Yeah. So Home Franchise Concepts is basically the parent company for what we have now in 9 brands within our system. So all sort of related with home service. We've got budget blinds, tailored living, concrete craft, Advantage Clean, kitchen tune-up, bath tune-up, Aussie, Patmobile, and Two Maids and a Mop. And then there's another one that's coming next month. And so basically what we do is we have brand presidents that are responsible for each one of those brands. And then as an oversight, we've got leadership that's responsible for marketing and franchise development and technology that presides over all of those brands to help support them so that we can leverage our assets and our the money we've got available and everything else to really be able to grow the business as a whole versus everything being siloed. We're also owned by a private family company. This is our 3rd ownership group. We were privately held by 5 guys that started us up from scratch with $5,000 and a dream. Those 5 guys are now on islands somewhere, boats or whatever. They're still good friends of mine, but they're doing quite well for themselves. I'm very happy for them. And then they sold to private equity, and our private equity experience was really great. Some of them can be really tough. We spent a long time vetting the private equity company that was going to become our buyers, because our culture here is pretty unique, and it's something that we wanted to make sure that whoever we brought in was going to maintain and enhance that culture versus coming in and just being all about the bottom line and tearing things apart, like can happen in some cases. Because as you know, private equity's generally got a much shorter window that they're looking at, right? 4 to 6 years. They need to be able to make a return on their investment during that period of time. And so a lot of times it's either we got to increase the bottom line or we got to cut expenses. And so, but they did great. They invested in us in ways that most private equity companies, I don't always see, like a year from exit and they're spending millions of dollars on software. And that's not something usually. So we had a great partner in that regard. But when the time came to move on from them, we this time we narrowed it down to 3 companies that we were looking at, and one of them was this private family called JM Family, which is best known for owning 177 Toyota dealerships in the the 5 Southwest states. They're the largest Toyota dealers in the world. They're the 20th largest privately held company in the country. It's like one of the biggest companies no one's ever heard of. But they wanted to get into the franchising in the home space and everything else, and it has been an absolute dream. Being owned and operated by them. They've got 5,000 associates that work there. They've got a lot of capital and they have the ability to make things happen. And it's been a lot of fun for us. So that's our forever home, I think.
I love it. So I get the question a lot from members in the Franchise Tribe Mastermind. They're like, are franchises getting bought out by private equity? Or I think it might get bought out. First of all, most franchises are probably going to get bought out by private equity at some point. Not all of them, but when you get into a franchise, just know that thing will probably get sold to private equity at some point. And that doesn't mean it's good or bad or whatever. It's just like I think people get scared because of the unknown of it. So from what you've seen with your own experience and then being in that world with other franchisors and you're friends with a lot of other franchisors, what advice would you have to a franchisee that is just getting bought out by private equity?
Yeah, I think it's ask all the questions, be patient, try to lean in and offer suggestions for things that could get better and also things that you really don't want to see go away. I think most, private equity companies, especially with the multiples that we're seeing out there today, they're paying a prime penny for these franchise organizations, and they love it because they love the repeatable revenue, and it's just not something that if you lose one franchisee, the whole business doesn't go down like it could be if you had a single line of product or something along those lines. So I get why they're all getting into this space, and most of them just really want to learn as much as they can about the business and see what they can do to improve it, because that's what they're looking at, a very short window to try to get it to another level so that obviously they can get a better return when they go ahead and sell it to probably another private equity or take it public or whatever that might be. I think a lot of people get really nervous that the culture is all going to change. Like, especially, if you go into a room with these private equity guys, and I love them, so I'm not saying anything negative, but you get a lot of blue suits and white shirts and a lot of side parts and a lot of really cool degrees from a lot of really good schools, right? And these guys are super smart and they work their tails off. I get emails at midnight on Saturdays and 4 a.m. on Sundays going, hey, I need this report and that report. But mostly they're not coming in trying to shake things up. They don't want to make a mess of what they just bought. They want to improve it. And so sort of being patient, not getting worried about it, and making sure that you're giving as much feedback. Now, when leadership changes, like if someone gets bought out entirely, that's where, you got to make sure that whoever comes in next, if that's the case, like what happened with our first acquisition, is going to be able to, understands the culture of the organization, assuming that it's a good culture and you want to continue it, or if it's a bad culture, someone that can change it. But private equity is, that's where we're all going to be at some point. And if you're not, then it's not a franchise that you want to really join, because if no one's interested in buying it, there's probably a problem.
So what are the best, like as a private equity company coming in, what are the best things that they can do? Or what would you want a private equity company to do? Like what's some of the best things that they can do for a franchisor, and let's say they have 50 to 100 locations open? Like what do you think a private equity company should be looking at to build value in that particular brand?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's capital, right? A lot of the companies, when they get to that point, they've been doing it on a shoestring budget for a long time. They've been very bootstrapped. And there's maybe some things that need to happen at that point. Software is a great example. Like for us, we always knew that we needed this bigger, better, badder CRM, but there was nothing on the shelf we could buy. We had to build it. It was going to be several $1 million. And when the 5 guys that owned the business privately ahead of time, they knew they were kind of on their way out, and they're like, listen, we don't want to spend that money. It's our money, And so the private equity came in and immediately, snapped their fingers and said, yeah, this is what we're doing. We're going to invest in this. We're going to bring in some resources because they've got tons of resources that they can allow you to use to improve the business. And they'll dive in and utilize their business sense. Like these guys are really smart, right? And so most of it's money, it's access to resources, and a lot of times it's building out the bench, right? It's hiring key people that you need to grow the business further because they can afford to do that. They've got, they understand that you have to spend money to make money, and that's really the key. I remember, when the 5 guys that started our business were leaving, they were like, listen, it's just time. Like the business has gotten bigger than what we know what to do with it, and we've been lucky in their opinion. I think it's, luck is a lot of hard work, quite frankly, but they understood that if it was going to continue to go the where it needed to go, it was beyond their capability to do that. And so kudos to them for saying, hey, listen, it's time to get someone in here that, because they care about the franchisees, right? So they want to see it continue to grow.
That's interesting. There's a lot of franchisors that really care about franchisees. I was talking to one the other day. They're going through a rough patch, and they could easily bail. They could easily bail on their franchisees, and it's going to cost them personally to not do that. And the franchisees, I know, will never know the sacrifice that the founders are making, or the folks that are in charge of the franchisor. So there's a lot of times like the franchisors are trying to do the right things, and they're going to do the right things even though us as franchisees may not even realize it at the time. And it's cool because you and I get to see different things on the inside of franchising that a lot of people don't get to see, and especially with these emerging brands, JT. I see so many, because I get to talk to them. I consult with some of them. Some of them are private clients, or some of them just ask me questions on instant messenger because they come into the Facebook group. But they really care about franchisees. And that's one of the things that's been refreshing to me over the past number of years, is seeing these new franchisors and how much they care about their franchisees and growing their brand. But at some point, they're going to sell too. And they should be thinking about selling. They should be thinking about building it to sell. And hopefully that's best for the franchisees. But what do you think, like, what advice would you give to an emerging brand? Because you guys are buying emerging brands that want to sell. Like, what are their options? Because there's some that are going to be, we want to buy it, but keep you as a founders involved running it. Some of them are like, we just want the whole thing and go away founders. And there's a mix of different exit opportunities for early stage emerging brands. But what advice would you give them?
Well, for me, ideally, and obviously it varies based on the brand, right? But if you are still part of the solution as a founder or a leader in that group, meaning, you're not the one that's keeping the business from growing, and even though you don't know it, assuming that you've still got a good relationship and things are still going right. I love when the founder stays in place for at least another turn, right? And usually the private equity companies will come in and do some kind of an earn out so that if we can reach certain goals in terms of number of franchisees or top line or bottom line or whatever that might be, then you can potentially have an even bigger payday at the end of that. And so it motivates everybody, and it also keeps things a little stable. It's kind of like getting a little pregnant, where you see what private equity can bring in, but you're not doing it in a void where all of a sudden the leadership and the culture and everything went away. Like if the five guys that started our company all just disappeared and we all went with them, no one would know who any of our franchisees were, and we'd lose that ability to just pick up the phone and call them and have frank conversations with them, because they would be fearful of the big guys from New York, and I could see that would create some big culture issues. So yeah, in some cases people just want a complete buyout, and if you've got the right people to step in, that's okay. But for me, if it were me, I'd say, listen, I want to keep some of my money on the table, and I'd like to see if I can't double it up by, with your support, private equity, taking this business from 100 to 250 in the next 5 years, so that we can do even better together. That to me is the ideal way to go.
I think this has been a very fun conversation around private equity, because you're not private equity. I'm not private equity. We work with it, and we have brands that we work with that work with private equity. But I think it's for emerging brands out there or franchisees that are getting into a brand that's just been bought out. There's just some frank, open conversation about it with nothing to prove. And you're not even owned by private equity right now. You're owned by a family. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk franchise development. And let's talk about that number 210 franchisee, the franchisee's mindset. Let's think about this. Think about the audience out there, and maybe we can do some comparing and contrasting, or just hit number 210 right now. But they're out there thinking about buying a brand, and they're getting talked into emerging is the way to go, or they're getting talked into being a part of an established, or they think they might know what they want and they really don't. So can you talk to those two different groups on what their mindset probably is and where they probably should be looking?
Yeah, and there are some people that are quite capable of being either, right? But what I find is that someone generally skews towards something else. When you talk about, here's the shiny new toy, the latest, hottest brand that's just come out. It's something cool that Fastlane's got going, for example. And I love those guys over there, and they're doing a great job with some emerging brands and getting some things going. As a matter of fact, I just referred somebody to them that we didn't acquire, and I said, go work with them and build up your account a little bit, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more. And they're already killing it. So, those shiny new toys get really exciting for people. They're like, oh, it's the next great idea and everything else. But I've been here long enough, as you have as well, to know that there's a lot of those shiny new toys that were in the past that aren't even here anymore. And it was a kind of a flash in the pan or a fad or whatever. And I want people to be, around for 20 years if they want to, 25 years in this business, and be able to hand it off to their kids and have their kids do it for 20 years if they want to. For me, that's important. So I don't want, people have to understand, is this something that is considered a fad, or is it here for the long term? And if it's a fad, it might still be good, but you have to understand that 20 years from now, ask yourself, is this business still going to be in place? If that's something that's important to you, you may be, listen, I've got a 5-year window, just like private equity, and I want to get in, I want to build it, I want to sell it and go on to the next thing, which is fine too. Like I said earlier, I think, that early emerging franchisee just needs to know that there's not going to be a lot of information yet. It's growing, it's building, and you can be a part of that, but you're going to have to figure some things out yourself in some cases with an emerging brand versus someone that's been around for 15 years and has got hundreds of franchisees that have been doing it. And you're also going to have to be willing to be that person that gets hit with all the early validation calls to help grow your brand. And you have to be able to put a positive spin on your experience as best you can if you want to help the franchisor and yourself grow, because that's what builds equity for you long term, is that if you can be an early adopter in a franchise that goes on to be really successful, the equity that you can build in this thing is amazing versus the people that come years later. As a quick story, when we first started selling Budget Wines franchises, they were like 10 grand. And some of those franchisees are still around today selling for, multi seven figures down the road, which has been a really nice return. And people come into me now going, well, how come it's 90 now? And I go, listen, you're benefiting from 25 years of the people that came before you that have been laying down the tracks, and now you're going to go from that. So there's more value for those people in that. Some people they don't want to figure it out. They don't want to be pressured to be validating. They just want to be in their silo. They want to have a nice, warm, well built out manual that they're following, and tons of coaches and marketing that's vibrant, and name recognition is a big thing with a lot of brands, right? They want something that they can drop at a cocktail party and someone will say, oh yeah, I know those, or my neighbor uses them, or something like that. Whereas some people are totally comfortable going, you're doing what? Like, I've never heard of that. What is that? Right. And so it's just a different mindset. And there may not be a ton of national marketing for an emerging brand. And so you're going to have to be really good at grassroots, local, doing networking, doing local SEO, wearing your logoed shirt to the grocery store to get attention. Like, you've got to be all in with that, as opposed to a really established national franchise that, maybe the National Advertising Fund does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, and you don't have to be as involved in that regard. So it's really just two different mindsets there.
Dude, you gave us more on that. So I think that's important, because there's gonna be people listening. And again, this is, you're just getting free advice here. Like, you're just getting really good information that you can take to the bank, because the challenge is when people are working with a consultant or they're working with a brand, they can hear the same thing that you just said, but they don't know how true it is, because they're thinking they're just trying to get me to buy this particular brand. So you hear it here on a podcast like this with, when JT has both sides to sell you, because he's got brands that are emerging and brands that are established. This is really solid information for anyone out there that is thinking about, emerging versus established. Let's shift gears again. Let's talk about, because we're just talking about fast lane and franchise fast lanes and FSO, a franchise sales organization. You do things in-house, and I love it. I love that you refer to brand over to them. And once you're on the inside of this, there's a lot of people that are good friends. They may look like competitors on the outside. Even within the FSOs, they might look like competitors on the outside, but they're really good friends. And there's a lot of good stuff that happens behind the scenes with all of these people. So FSO versus in-house sales. That's a broad topic, but I just want to throw that out there to you. Where do you want to go with FSO versus in-house sales?
Yeah, it's interesting because I never used an FSO because we've always done it in-house. So, certainly my experience is limited to my understanding, and yes, the friendships that I have with the folks at Fastlane and Brand One and Rhino 7 and all the rest of them that are out there, and they do a really great job. And I think it's interesting because there weren't FSOs when I started in this business. Everyone did it kind of on their own, right? Like you had your little in-house, and whether it was the president of the company that was also trying to sell franchises, or they had one guy that said they knew something about franchises that was out there. And the business has obviously changed quite a bit. Like when I first started, we'd wait for the tear-off coupon from the inside of Entrepreneur Magazine to come, and trying to figure out what someone wrote on the card. Like, is that a 5 or a 6? I got to call this guy back, right? And it was just a whole different world than what we have today with digital and so much information out there. But yeah, the FSOs do a great job for emerging franchisors that can't get there themselves, right? They don't have the resources to hire a really professional franchise development person, because if you don't have the resources to get somebody really good, you shouldn't get anyone at all. Because a bad franchise development person, and I've had a couple of them over the years, not a lot, but a couple, can absolutely destroy your business in some ways. They're putting the wrong people in with the wrong expectations. and it can absolutely destroy it. And so you're better off in that case just not doing it at all if you can't afford it yourself. And these companies are really, really good at going out and acquiring the leads and vetting the people and getting people on board. One thing that I don't know how they feel about it. I have to ask Ryan, but the thing that I feel like I would miss if I was on that side is just the ongoing continued relationship that I get to have with our franchisees and being a part of what helps them grow, and having them reach out to me and say, hey, you're never going to believe this, but I just did this month and that this month, and I want to refer my buddy to you. And we do a lot of that here. And for me, I just like to have it in-house so that I can control a little bit of their successes, and I can be responsible going forward for their success. Like, I have to live with the people that I put in business, right? They're moving into my house, and I got to make sure that everything that we said we were going to do, we're doing. And if not, I can walk down the hall and bang on the person in the marketing department or bang on the ops person and going, hey, we're dropping the ball for this guy here, and we've got to go and do things. And I'm not sure that once FSOs get done with folks, that a lot of that goes on going forward. But that's just the responsibility of that emerging franchisor to make sure that they're doing what they need to do and that they're in close communication with that FSO to do that. We grow things kind of onesies and twosies, which isn't very popular, especially amongst the consultants out there today that love their 3s and 5 packs and everything else. But, I try to practice what I call responsible franchising, which means don't let someone bite off more than they can chew. If you get to the dessert table at a buffet and you've already paid for it all, so it's like, oh, everything looks good, I'm going to have a slice of everything, right? And then you an hour later you're doubled over in pain because you did too much. And I think that's what people, especially with emerging brands, when it's this hot new thing and someone's like, hey, you can have all of the North Dallas market, and just and it's going to be great, and hopefully it will be, but it hasn't really been proven yet. And what I hate and what I don't want to see is people come back going, man, if I known then what I know now, I would have only started with 1 or 2, and we're never going to get those other ones open because we don't have the scale and we don't have the skill set to be managing large groups of people and that sort of thing. So we just got to do it a little bit more low key to make sure that people can really get off to the kind of start they had. And if they want to grow beyond that, we'll help them grow all day long. But I just don't like to do too much of it at the onset.
Well, it's interesting too, because most of what I've done is in-house. So I've been in-house. I've never worked for an FSO. It was always in-house, or I created an in-house franchise development team. But one of the I guess one of the lessons that I've learned along the way as a franchisee buying is there's usually more territory that stays open than what you think there will be. So especially in newer brands, you think you need to buy a large region. You really don't need to buy a large region, because most likely there's going to be some areas that open up, or you're going to be able to expand different areas, or people that did buy a big region realize they shouldn't have bought a big region. And now you can go after the brand's a bit more established and take over that particular area. So I think a lot of, that's just restraint, but it's hard. It's hard to do when you see territories and it's just another 30K or 20K, and you can have this other area, look at it on the map and like, I want it. But I've told people a lot, and I've had to practice that restraint myself. And sometimes I haven't practiced it, but you don't need to buy a 3-pack or a 10-pack. You just don't need to do it. And if you did not do it and you wish you would have, well, that's a win in itself, because then you're part of a brand that did really well and you're making money as a franchisee. You're just not making as much as you would have if you had 2 or 3 times as much territory. But even
and then you can integrate vertically, right? So then maybe instead of growing horizontally by adding more and more territories to your brand, you're like, okay, what's next? I'm going to be a multi-brand business owner, and I'm going to stack things on top of my territory to leverage my office space, leverage my contacts, leverage my leads. And that's what we're seeing a lot of our franchisees starting to do, is saying, hey, my budget blinds, for example, is running great. Time for me to add a kitchen tune-up, or time for me to add a tailored living, or whatever it might be, and growing their businesses that way. And so I think there's always going to be opportunity, to your point, and just make sure that you don't overmax yourself at the onset. Some people are fully capable of going in and doing that. They've run businesses before, they've got the capital. But I've seen so many times where people get into something, there's no use giving you a runway that's 6 feet too short to get off the ground, right? And if you don't have enough capital to get to where you need to be, then none of us are going to succeed. And that's sort of the approach that I take every day is I don't want to have to look someone in the face and say, sorry, we oversold you and now you're in trouble financially. So that's kind of the approach I take.
Shifting gears again, let's talk about broker consultant networks, because I know that you know them well. You've done a lot of deals with them. For the franchisors out there, and maybe they're franchisees too, and they're working, or new franchise or soon to be franchisees that are working with a consultant, I want to give some color on the broker networks, consultant networks out there. And I was, a consultant for many years, and haven't been one for a year, and I don't plan on going back into it because I'm doing other things. But I loved it. I loved doing that and had a lot of fun. But what would you say, like, for, a brand that is thinking about going into the consulting networks, maybe some of the things that you think are great about them and some of the things that might be red flags for particular brands?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm actually consulting with a couple brands right now that have asked me the same question recently. So I'll just tell you what I told them. Interview the companies, first of all, like interview them all and understand their fee structure, understand what sort of resources they're going to give you to get in front of the consultants, understand their culture a little bit if you can, and validate with other brands that are already in their system. Because what I see some cases is that some of these emerging brands, especially, they try to be in every broker group that's out there. And we work with every one of them almost, because we've been doing it a long time, but you don't have the resources, you don't have the bandwidth, probably even not the financial wherewithal to be as good as you need to be with every one of these groups. So start small, start with one or two of these groups that you feel like would be a good fit for you, that you're getting good validation from the other Zors that are with them, and build relationships, because it's all about a couple things, right? And you know this, it's about building relationships with the brokers and making sure that the consultants, and making sure that they trust you and they understand you and they understand how you work and how your brand works and everything else. And then you have to prove that you can close deals. And that's the biggest thing, right? Like, you may have the sexiest brand alive and it's the next greatest thing and everyone's really excited about it, but if they start sending a couple people over to you and they don't get phone calls right away, they don't get follow-up, you don't get feedback back and forth with the consultant, we don't close the deals, they'll be like, listen, you may have a great brand, but you can't close franchise sales. And so I'm going to go to someone that can, and that's proven, because, you guys eat what you kill, right? And so it's, that's really important. I think I see people trying to spread themselves too thin because there's all kinds of conferences and everything else that you can get to go to present. But if you're on the road all the time, you're probably not focused on your business, especially as emerging franchisor. So yeah, pick one or two. They're great organizations to be with. I also say focus. Everyone always comes into the consultant groups, and they're like, okay, who are the top five? Who are the top five consultants? I need to be with those guys, because they're the ones that are out there doing the most, and I want to sell. They probably aren't going to pay a lot of attention to you in a lot of cases because they've got what is going on with them already, and they're probably, until yours is proven, they probably won't give you a lot of the time of day. I'm not everyone, but really focus on those that are up and coming within that group, that are hungry, that are wanting to grow and create relationships with those folks. And I think that's where the sweet spot is that I see over the years of working with consultants.
Man, you just like regurgitated what I told Dave over at Client Tether when I was on his podcast earlier today, because we had a conversation around this, and like so many of the same things, but it's so good. I mean, so many of these brands don't get that, and they're going after it. As a top consultant, I get all these new brands coming up to me and saying, Eric, just send me leads. I'm like, you need to listen to a podcast that says, don't do what you're doing. do it this other way to actually get leads. But that brings up another point. Emerging brands don't know franchise development well yet. And I have private clients and I'm helping them with their franchise development. I'm sure you help a lot too. So, but they don't really understand what a really good experienced franchise development rep can do for their brand. Like, so what advice would you give an emerging brand that thinking, there's no difference between a $50,000 or $70,000 a year franchise development person and a $300,000 or $500,000 or $1 million franchise development person?
Right. Yeah. You get what you pay for. There's a reason why if someone's making $500,000 a year selling franchises, there's a reason why. Is they're really good at what they do, right? And it's probably not just that they're great salespeople, but it's probably because they have a connection with their franchisees that they're bringing on. These become lifelong friends for a lot of the people that work for me. They get Christmas cards from them. They send them a note when their babies are born. Like it's a relationship that they're building as opposed to just selling somebody something. And I think the people that get that, that love, they have to be passionate about your brand, but really most importantly, they need to be passionate about what they can do for your franchisees. How can I change your life if you become a franchisee with me? And if I don't care enough about you to answer that question on a daily basis, then I'm not the right fit for your business. You have to have somebody that can do that. And they don't have to have 20 years of experience doing this and have sold thousands of franchisees, but they do have to care. I believe they truly have to care. I think they have to be servant leaders. I think they have to be passionate about helping others, as well as all the other things that typically you would want from a salesperson. But I think those are the things that you really should focus on. And there are some tricks and tips as an emerging franchisor too that you'll want to think about. I'll throw a couple out if you want.
Yeah.
This that I see is like earlier we were talking about validation and how people get overrun with validation when you've got 5 franchisees or 10 franchisees. But validation is key, right? If people can't say that the business is great, then you're gonna have a hard time moving them to discovery day or confirmation day and closing them. And so one thing that we started doing to sort of take some of the weight off is we started hosting either a weekly or bi-weekly call, depending on the brand, where we'd have a franchisee that would position himself every Wednesday at 4:00, and potential franchisees could get on this conference call, and they basically just spitball anything they wanted to say. We weren't hosting it; they were just doing it, and sort of doing their validation call live with anywhere from 4 to 10 other people that are looking at the business. And then we record all those. We actually have a third party that does it so that we don't touch it and we're not breaking any rules. And we create a library so that people can go on and listen to 20, 25 of these hour-and-a-half long calls. And I had people that say, I didn't even talk to a single franchisee. I just listened to 25 validation calls and I got what I needed out of it, because after the third one and the fourth one and the fifth one, they all started sounding the same, which is what you want. You want people saying, consistently. If it's all over the place, then you've got bigger issues. So try to take some of the weight off those people by having them inundated. They're trying to run a business that's a startup phase. And if they're getting crushed by validation calls, they're not going to be happy with you. They're not going to get their business where they need to. So try to save some of the heavy lifting with the conference calls as a suggestion. And the other one is just, I'm amazed at how many emerging brands I work with that don't have a referral program. They don't have a referral program for their franchisees to send people to them that can become franchisees, because as an emerging franchisor, a lot of your early franchisees typically are going to be customers, friends and family, former work associates that say, oh, wow, look at what you're doing with that brand. Like, tell me more about that, because I'm thinking about doing something myself. And so putting in a little bit of a financial incentive or something, whether it's a trip for 2 or some money or something like that promotes to your franchisees to share your brand and send people into us, is kind of a no-brainer. And we've been doing it for a long, long time.
So what's a good referral fee or a referral program? I like the trip for 2. Can you give a little bit more color to that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what we do. And then it's not, obviously we're a much larger organization at this point, but we started looking at it saying, listen, if we would be willing to pay a consultant X, why wouldn't we be willing to pay our franchisee almost the same amount? And actually that money stays in the system, right? They can go buy another van with it or put it into marketing and everything else. So in that way, it's really good. So right now, basically the way our program works is any of our franchisees can refer someone to any one of our brands, because a lot of times they don't want to sell their backyard territory to a friend because they're hoping to grow into that someday. But if we end up doing that deal, we'll pay them $15,000, and then we do a group trip once a year, where we go to a kind of a 5-star hotel, and I take usually a limit to 40 couples. So I'll have 40 couples in Colorado this year, and in Jackson Hole next year, and that sort of thing. So and we just get together and have a great time and celebrate our success with the referrals.
So $15K and a trip with others in epic places at great hotels.
Yeah. And so even if you don't have the cash to spend on that, just put it together a trip once a year and make it or even a free pass to convention, and we'll pay for your hotel room if that's what you have to deal with. Just everyone's got something they can work with. And, if you're not doing something aggressive in that line, you're really missing out, in my opinion.
No, I really like that. I know we're about done. I think, what would you say is the average cost per deal out there that's non-broker?
Yeah,
it's yours.
For us, it's 18,000.
So their average deal costs them 18,000 to get, because they have a big budget. They're doing other advertising other places. So they're basically, they're even saving money, giving referral. Well, they're probably, it's about a break even. So whatever this is how I would look at it. Whatever your cost per deal is from organics, that would be a good referral fee to give. And a lot of times it's 10,000 for brands, even emerging brands. It's probably $10,000 a deal. So why would
by the way, it's the easiest sale you've got, because you've got the franchisee that referred them. That's usually back there saying, "Hey, come over to see my store. I'll take you on a sales appointment," and they're motivated to help their friend get in if it's the right fit for them. And so, yeah, it's a no-brainer in my view.
I love it, man. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there, because that is some very good actionable advice as well. So JT, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it was fun. Good seeing you again, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.